Resting heavily on my kitchen island is a manila envelope containing my legal salvation, a restraining order permanently severing me from my birth mother. 3 weeks ago, she moved far beyond simply overstepping boundaries. She walked through my unlocked front door with a packed diaper bag, fully intending to kidnap my newborn son. You need to understand the hierarchy of my childhood home, to understand how my mother justified what she did. In our house, there was the sun, and there was the orbit. My older sister, Jessica, was the sun. I was just the cold, gray rock caught in her gravitational pull, existing mostly to make sure she didn't burn out. Jessica was charismatic, beautiful, and deeply, chronically incapable of managing her own life. She dropped out of college twice. She racked up credit card debt that my parents quietly liquidated their retirement funds to pay off. She married a guy she knew for 4 months, divorced him 8 months later, and moved back into my childhood bedroom because hers had already been converted into her personal yoga studio. Every disaster Jessica created was framed by my mother, Barbara, as a tragedy inflicted upon her. Jessica never made mistakes. She was merely a victim of a cruel world that didn't understand her sensitive soul. I, on the other hand, was the easy one. Translated from Barbara speak, that meant I was ignored. I paid for my own community college. I met David, a man whose quiet, steady temperament anchored me to the ground. We bought a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. We worked. We lived our boring, quiet lives, and my mother rarely called unless she needed me to co-sign a loan for Jessica or help her move out of another apartment. I learned early on that cynicism was the best armor against a mother who only saw you as a utility. The dynamic shifted drastically when David and I announced we were pregnant. We did it at a rare Sunday dinner at my mother's house. I was 12 weeks along. When I handed my mother the framed ultrasound photo, her reaction wasn't joy. It was immediate, panicked calculation. She looked from the grainy black and white printout to Jessica, who was sitting across the table, aggressively cutting a piece of dry chicken. Jessica had recently been diagnosed with severe endometriosis. Her doctors had told her that natural conception was highly unlikely. It was undeniably sad, and I felt for her, but Jessica's grief had become a black hole that swallowed every other emotion in the family. "Oh," my mother said, sliding the frame face down on the tablecloth. "Are you sure this is the right time? You work so much, Holly." "We're thrilled, Barbara," David said, his voice dropping an octave, a subtle warning. Jessica burst into tears, threw her napkin on her plate, and ran upstairs. My mother glared at me as if I had just stabbed her favorite child. "You couldn't have told me this privately? You know how fragile she is right now. Honestly, Holly, you can be so cruel." That was the beginning of the delusion. Over the next 6 months, my mother's attitude morphed from resentment to a bizarre, suffocating obsession with my pregnancy. But it wasn't about me. She started buying baby clothes, expensive ones, organic cotton, onesies, cashmere cardigans. But she didn't bring them to my house. She kept them at hers. "Therefore, when the baby stays here," she told me over the phone one afternoon. "Mom, I'm planning to breastfeed, and David works from home. The baby isn't going to be doing sleepovers for a long time." Silence on the line, then a cold, sharp laugh. "We'll see. A baby needs a village, Holly, and Jessica has so much love to give. She has the time. You'll be begging us to take him." The real red flags started waving at the baby shower. David's mother had organized it. My mother and Jessica arrived late. Jessica was wearing a flowing, white, empire waist dress that looked suspiciously like a maternity gown. Throughout the afternoon, whenever someone asked me a question about the nursery or the name, my mother would answer for Jessica. "We're leaning toward an ocean theme," my mother told David's aunt. Jessica has always found the ocean so calming. I caught David's eye across the room. He looked as thoroughly creeped out as I felt. When it was time to open gifts, Jessica came and sat directly next to me, her knee pressed against mine. When I pulled out a tiny pair of socks, Jessica reached over, took them from my hand, and stroked them. "I can't wait to dress him in these," Jessica whispered, her eyes completely vacant, staring at the wall. "I'll be dressing him, Jess," I said, keeping my voice light but firm. I pulled the socks back. She blinked, looking at me as if she had forgotten I was even there. That night, lying in bed, my swollen belly aching, I told David, they're not coming to the hospital. When I go into labor, nobody tells them until we are home and settled. David kissed my forehead. Done. I'll make sure security knows. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought my cynical brain was just reading too much into a grieving sister and an enabling mother. I had no idea they were already building a fantasy world where I was just the surrogate. Labor does not care about your carefully typed birth plan. It took 18 hours for my son, Leo, to enter the world. 18 hours of sweat, tearing pain, a failed epidural that left my left leg completely numb while my right side felt every agonizing contraction, and a profound animalistic exhaustion. When they finally placed Leo on my chest, covered in vernix and screaming, the rest of the world dissolved. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a shock of dark hair, just like David's. For a few hours in that recovery room, it was just the three of us. We were a fortress. Then the fortress walls crumbled. It was around 4 in the afternoon. I was wearing a stained hospital gown, clutching an ice pack between my legs, attempting to get Leo to latch. David was asleep in the uncomfortable vinyl recliner by the window. The heavy wooden door to my room swung open. No knock. My mother walked in, followed closely by Jessica. They smelled overwhelmingly of Chanel No. 5 and stale coffee, a jarring intrusion into the sterile metallic smell of the hospital. I froze, instinctively curling my body around Leo. "How did you get in here?" I rasped, my throat still raw from screaming. "You aren't on the list." My mother waved a hand dismissively, carrying a massive bouquet of blue hydrangeas. "Oh, please. A grandmother doesn't need to be on a list. I just told the nurses at the front desk that we were family. They were lovely." David jerked awake, his eyes instantly hardening as he took in the scene. He stood up, placing himself between the bed and my mother. "Barbara, we said no visitors. Holly is exhausted." "We aren't visitors, David. We're family," my mother said, sidestepping him with the practiced agility of a woman who has ignored boundaries her entire life. She looked down at me, or rather, at the bundle in my arms. Her eyes were bright, manic. "Let me see him," she demanded. Before I could protest, Jessica stepped forward. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Leo with a hunger that made the hair on my arms stand up. She reached out, her hands trembling. "Give him to me, Holly," Jessica whispered. It wasn't a request. "No," I said, tightening my grip. "I'm feeding him. You need to step back." My mother sighed loudly, the sound vibrating with manufactured disappointment. "Holly, don't be selfish. Jessica has been waiting for this all day. You've had him for hours. Share." Share, like he was a piece of cake, like he was a sweater she wanted to borrow. "He's a newborn, Barbara, not a toy," David snapped, his voice rising. He pointed toward the door. "Both of you, out, now." Just then, a postpartum nurse walked in to check my vitals. She took one look at the tension in the room and stopped. "Is everything okay in here?" My mother instantly pivoted, turning on the charm. "Oh, everything is wonderful. We're just so excited. This is my daughter, Jessica," she said, gesturing to my sister. "She's going to be the best mommy. We're just dying to hold our little guy." The nurse looked confused, glancing from Jessica to me, lying in the hospital bed with the baby. "Wait, who is the mother?" "I am," I barked, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the exhaustion. "And I want them out of my room. Security was supposed to keep them out." Jessica's face crumpled into a mask of pure devastation. She looked at my mother, tears spilling over her mascara. "Mom, she won't let me hold my baby. Why won't she let me hold my baby?" The blood drained from my face. My baby. My mother wrapped an arm around Jessica's shoulders, glaring at me with pure venom. "Look what you're doing to her, Holly. You are so hateful. You have a husband. You have a house. You have everything. Why do you have to keep this from her too?" "Get the hell out!" David roared. It was the loudest I had ever heard him yell. It shocked even my mother into silence. The nurse immediately hit a button on the wall, calling for backup. Within 2 minutes, security had escorted a screaming Barbara and a weeping Jessica down the hallway. The last thing I heard before the heavy doors sealed shut was my mother yelling, "You can't keep him from us, Holly. We are his family." David sat on the edge of my bed, his hands shaking. He looked at me, his face pale. "I'm changing the locks the minute we get home," he said quietly. "Do it," I whispered, holding Leo so tightly he squeaked in protest. We stayed in the hospital for 2 more days. I didn't sleep. Every time the door creaked, my heart hammered against my ribs. We ignored dozens of calls and texts from my mother. Most of them were calling me a monster, accusing me of triggering Jessica's depression. Not a single text asked how I was feeling or how the baby was doing. When we finally drove home, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. David installed new deadbolts that afternoon and put up 2 exterior cameras. I thought we were safe. I thought the worst they could do was harass us from afar. I underestimated the depth of my mother's delusion. I underestimated what she believed she was owed. The first 2 weeks postpartum are a blur of bodily fluids, sleep deprivation, and survival. You operate in 2-hour increments. Day and night lose their meaning, bleeding into a continuous twilight of feeding, burping, and trying to heal. David was incredible, but he had to return to work after 2 weeks, even if it was just logging in from his home office. One Tuesday afternoon, we realized we were completely out of diapers and my iron supplements. The pharmacy was a 10-minute drive away. "I'll be quick," David said, grabbing his keys. 30 minutes, tops. The doors are locked, the alarm is set to stay. Just rest. Leo was asleep in his bassinet in the nursery across the hall from our bedroom. I dragged myself into bed, my body aching with that deep, hollow pain that follows childbirth. I left the bedroom door open, the baby monitor glowing softly on my nightstand, and closed my eyes. I didn't mean to fall into a deep sleep, but exhaustion pulled me under like a heavy tide. I woke up to a sound. It wasn't a cry from the monitor. It was a physical noise in the house, a distinct squeak of the floorboard at the top of the stairs. I blinked, groggy, disoriented. I looked at the clock. David had been gone 20 minutes. He wouldn't be walking upstairs so quietly. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate. This step was light, cautious. Ice water dumped into my veins. I sat up, ignoring the sharp pull of my stitches. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from my nightstand, unplugging it with a sharp yank. I crept to my bedroom doorway and peered out into the hallway. The door to the nursery was ajar. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. I moved silently across the carpet, gripping the brass lamp so tightly my knuckles ached. I pushed the nursery door open with my foot. My mother was standing over the changing table. She wasn't looking at me. She was fully dressed in a beige trench coat, a massive floral diaper bag slung over her shoulder, a bag I had never seen before. Sitting on the floor next to her was a pristine, brand-new infant car seat. She was lifting Leo out of his bassinet. He grunted, waving his tiny fists, eyes still closed. "What are you doing?" The words came out of me not as a scream, but as a low, guttural growl that didn't even sound human. My mother jumped, nearly dropping the baby. She spun around, clutching Leo to her chest. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. "Holly, you're awake. You should be resting," she said smoothly, as if I had just caught her doing the laundry. "Put him down," I said, stepping into the room. I raised the brass lamp slightly. "Put my son down right now." "Don't be dramatic," she sighed, adjusting Leo in her arms. She was holding him expertly, securely. She began moving toward the car seat on the floor. "Jessica is having a terrible week, Holly. She's completely inconsolable. I'm just taking him for a few hours to lift her spirits. You need the sleep anyway. You look terrible." My brain fractured. The sheer audacity, the clinical detachment in her voice, it didn't compute. She was stealing my child to act as an emotional support animal for her golden child. "How did you get in?" I demanded, moving between her and the bedroom door. "I kept a copy of David's old key from when you two were on vacation last year. Obviously, you locked the deadbolt, but I know how to bypass that cheap alarm sensor on the back door." "Really, Holly, you should upgrade your security." She said it with the casual arrogance of a woman giving household tips. She bent down to strap Leo into the car seat. The instinct of a mother is a terrifying thing. It bypasses logic. It bypasses fear. It is pure, violent biology. I dropped the lamp. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I lunged at her. I grabbed my mother by the lapels of her trench coat and shoved her backward with every ounce of strength in my battered body. She crashed into the glider chair, knocking it over. Leo, safely strapped into the car seat on the floor, jolted and began to shriek. "Are you insane?" my mother screamed, scrambling to her feet. "You could have hurt him. Get away from him," I roared. I stood over the car seat, vibrating with a rage so profound my vision literally blurred at the edges. "Holly, listen to me," my mother said, dropping the polite facade. Her voice turned vicious, ugly. "You don't understand what it's like to have nothing. Jessica has nothing. You have David, you have a career, you have this house. You don't need this baby the way she does. You owe her this. You owe me this." I backed up slowly, pulling the heavy car seat behind me by the handle, keeping my body between my mother and my son. I reached into my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. I dialed 911. "I have an intruder in my house," I said, my voice eerily calm as the operator answered. "She is trying to kidnap my baby. Send police immediately." My mother's face drained of color. The reality of the situation finally seemed to pierce her delusion. "You wouldn't. Try to take him again and see what I do, Barbara." She looked at me, then at the baby, and then bolted for the door. She practically flew down the stairs. I heard the back door slam. I ran to the front window of the nursery, dragging the car seat with me. Looking down at the street, I saw it. Jessica's silver Honda was idling in the driveway. The passenger door was open. My mother sprinted across the lawn, threw herself into the passenger seat, and slammed the door. The car tires squealed as Jessica threw it into reverse, peeling out of the driveway and speeding down the suburban street just as David's car turned the corner. I collapsed onto the nursery floor, wrapping my arms around the car seat, burying my face in the fabric near Leo's head, and finally began to sob. The police arrived 4 minutes later. David arrived 30 seconds before them. He found me on the floor, holding our screaming child, shaking so hard my teeth were rattling. When I told him what happened, I saw a look in my husband's eyes that I had never seen before. It was murder. That afternoon, the police visited my mother's house. She told them I was suffering from postpartum psychosis. She told them she was there because I called her in a panic, asking her to take the baby because I was afraid I was going to hurt him. She said I attacked her in a manic state. She almost got away with it, because who wouldn't believe a concerned grandmother over a hysterical, bleeding, sleep-deprived new mother? But my mother forgot about the new cameras David had installed, and she definitely forgot that cameras record audio. The two police officers standing in my living room looked like they would rather be anywhere else. The older one, a heavy-set guy named Miller, whose uniform strained slightly at the buttons, had the weary, practiced posture of a man who spent his career mediating messy domestic disputes. He had already taken a statement from my mother at her house. I could tell by the way he looked at me, a patronizing blend of pity and skepticism, that he had bought her story. He saw a hormonal, bleeding, sleep-deprived new mother who had simply snapped at an overbearing grandmother. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice slow and soothing in a way that made my teeth grind. "Postpartum emotions run high. It's very common to misinterpret intentions. Your mother stated she was there to relieve you so you could sleep, and you became physically aggressive. She's deciding whether to press assault charges against you." I sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching a throw pillow over my stomach. The local anesthetic from my tearing was wearing off, replaced by a deep, throbbing ache. I didn't have the energy to scream. I didn't have the energy to cry. I just looked at David. David didn't say a word to the officer. He walked into his home office, grabbed his laptop, and brought it out to the coffee table. He opened it, clicked a few times to access the cloud storage for our new security system, and turned the screen toward the two cops. "We installed these yesterday," David said, his voice dead flat. "The camera on the back porch caught her entry. The camera in the nursery caught the rest. Both record in 1080p. Both record audio. Officer Miller sighed, pulling out a small notepad, clearly humoring us. His younger partner leaned in. David hit play. The crisp audio filled our quiet living room. First came the sound of the back door, the metallic scrape of a credit card or thin tool sliding against the strike plate, followed by the heavy thunk of the door opening. My mother hadn't just walked in. She had broken in. Then, the nursery footage. The angle was from the top corner of the room, looking down at the crib and the changing table. The video showed my mother packing Leo into the car seat. It showed me entering the room, holding the lamp. It showed the physical altercation. But the video wasn't what changed the air in the room. It was the audio. Obviously, you locked the deadbolt, but I know how to bypass that cheap alarm sensor on the back door. Officer Miller stopped writing. He looked up from his notepad, his eyes locking onto the screen. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing. Jessica has nothing. You have David, you have a career, you have this house. You don't need this baby the way she does. You owe her this. You owe me this. The younger officer exhaled a sharp breath, shaking his head. Miller's jaw tightened. The patronizing grandmother misunderstanding narrative evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a felony in progress. I need a copy of this file, Miller said, his voice stripped of the soothing customer service tone. Right now. Email it to my official address. David sent it. The officers took my official statement. They photographed the knocked-over glider chair, the dropped brass lamp, and the muddy footprints my mother had tracked onto the nursery rug. They informed us that bypassing a lock and attempting to remove a child without the parents' consent crossed multiple legal lines. Burglary, attempted kidnapping. We're going back to her residence, Miller told us as he put his cap back on. Keep your doors locked. If she or your sister returns, do not engage. Call 911 immediately. When the police cruisers pulled out of our driveway, the silence in the house was deafening. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the suffocating, heavy quiet of a bomb shelter after the siren stops. David locked the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and stood there for a long time with his hand on the brass knob. He turned around, walked over to the couch, and pulled me into his chest. I finally let go of the throw pillow. I buried my face in his shirt and sobbed until I was dry heaving. That night, neither of us slept. We pulled the bassinet into the center of our bed, boxing Leo in between us. Every time a car drove past, David's eyes darted to the window. Every time the house settled, I flinched. We had survived the physical intrusion, but the psychological breach was absolute. Home was no longer a safe place. It was a breached perimeter. The fallout began the next morning. My mother was arrested at 7 a.m. They didn't use sirens, but the neighbors saw her being led out of her house in handcuffs. She posted bail by noon. By 1 p.m., my phone started exploding. In dysfunctional families, there is a role known as the flying monkey, the relatives and friends dispatched by the abuser to harass the victim into compliance. My phone became a relentless stream of notifications. Aunt Carol left a weeping voicemail. Holly, how could you do this to your own mother? She spent the night in a cell. She was just trying to help you with the baby. You know how she gets. She just has so much love to give. Drop the charges, please. You're destroying the family. My cousin Mark texted, You're a real piece of work, dragging the cops into family business. Jessica is in the hospital on a psychiatric hold because of you. Hope you're happy. I didn't answer them. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the screen as the names popped up, one by one. People who hadn't bothered to call me to congratulate me on the birth of my son were suddenly fiercely invested in my life. It was a cynical realization, but a necessary one. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a structural, load-bearing beam in the architecture of my mother's dysfunction. My job was to absorb the weight of Jessica's failures and my mother's narcissism. By refusing to hand over my child, I had stepped out of line, and the whole house was collapsing. They weren't mad that my mother had committed a crime. They were mad that I was forcing them to look at it. David walked into the kitchen, took the phone from my hand, and turned it off. We're getting a lawyer, he said, and we're getting a restraining order. The legal consultation took place via Zoom 3 days later. Our attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, listened to our story and watched the video. She didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. She just took methodical notes. Family courts hesitate to sever biological ties, especially grandmothers, Sarah explained, her voice remarkably calm. Usually they push for mediation. But this isn't a disagreement over visiting hours. This is documented, premeditated burglary with intent to take a minor. We bypass family court. We go straight to civil court for a personal protection order. We aim for a permanent injunction. What about my sister? I asked, looking at the sleeping baby in my arms. She was the getaway driver. She thinks my son belongs to her. We file against her too, Sarah said. We build a wall of paper around your family. If they breach it, they go to jail. It's that simple. But it wasn't simple. It was agonizing. Preparing the affidavit required me to document every weird comment, every crossed boundary, every manipulative text message my mother had sent over the past year. I had to catalog my own mother's descent into madness. I had to put into writing that the woman who was supposed to protect me was the primary threat to my child. I didn't mourn the mother I lost. I mourned the mother I never had. I grieved the realization that the maternal instinct, that fierce, protective biology I felt so intensely for Leo, was something my mother only possessed for Jessica. I was just an incubator, a means to an end. We filed the paperwork. A temporary order was granted immediately based on the police report and video evidence. The final hearing to make the order permanent was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Those 14 days were the longest of my life. We lived like prisoners. We ordered groceries for delivery and made the driver leave them at the end of the driveway. We kept the blinds drawn. Whenever David had to take the trash out, he carried his phone in his hand, his thumb resting over the emergency dial button. Every night, I would stand over Leo's crib, watching his chest rise and fall. He was so small, so entirely oblivious to the hurricane of madness swirling outside his nursery. I promised him, whispering into the dark room, that he would never know that chaos. He would never be treated as a utility. He would just be allowed to be a kid. The courthouse was a masterclass in sterile intimidation. Fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the beige linoleum floors and heavy wooden benches. It smelled faintly of floor wax and anxious sweat. David and I sat on a bench outside courtroom 4B. My stomach was in tight, painful knots. I was wearing a black blazer and dress pants that barely fit over my postpartum body. I felt exposed, raw. Down the hallway, the elevator dinged. My mother walked out, followed by Jessica, and a man in a sharp gray suit who was clearly their attorney. I hadn't seen them since the break-in. My mother was dressed in a conservative, soft pink cardigan and a pearl necklace. She looked exactly like a sweet, PTA organizing, cookie-baking grandmother. It was a calculated costume. Jessica looked terrible. She had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and she was wearing a massive, oversized sweater. She was clutching a small, blue baby blanket to her chest. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized the blanket. It was one from the hospital, one she must have stolen from my room during her ambush. Jessica didn't look at me. She stared blankly at the wall, rhythmically stroking the blue fabric. My mother, however, locked eyes with me. There was no remorse in her expression. There was only a cold, burning fury. She looked away and whispered something to her lawyer. The bailiff opened the heavy wooden doors. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Garza. We filed into the courtroom. It was vastly empty, echoing with the sound of our footsteps. We sat at the petitioner's table. They sat at the respondent's table. A wide, terrifyingly small aisle separated us. Judge Garza was a woman in her late 50s with sharp features and glasses perched at the end of her nose. She didn't look like someone who tolerated nonsense. She opened the thick file on her desk, scanning the documents for a long moment before looking up. This is a petition for a permanent personal protection order against Barbara and Jessica, Judge Garza began, her voice projecting clearly across the room. The petitioners allege breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, and severe harassment. I have read the police report. I have viewed the video evidence submitted. She looked directly at my mother's attorney. Counselor, do your clients contest the events depicted in the video? The gray suit stood up. Your Honor, we do not contest that Barbara entered the home. However, we vehemently contest the characterization of the event as an attempted kidnapping. My client is a deeply concerned grandmother. The petitioner, Holly, has a documented history of severe anxiety. Barbara was simply there to help. She bypassed the lock because she feared for the infant's safety. Her words in the video were spoken in the heat of a familial argument, taken wildly out of context. It was a brilliant, disgusting spin. They were trying to weaponize the very vulnerability of my postpartum state against me. Out of context, Judge Garza repeated flatly. She pushed her glasses up her nose. She stated, "You owe her this. You owe me this." While strapping a newborn into a car seat she brought herself, without the mother's knowledge or consent. What is the appropriate context for that statement, Counselor? The lawyer cleared his throat. It was a hyperbolic expression of familial frustration. Your Honor, my clients are simply asking for family mediation, not a legally enforced severance. Judge Garza turned her gaze to me. Holly, do you wish to speak? I stood up. My knees were shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the wooden table to stay upright. I looked at the judge. I refused to look at my mother. Your Honor, I started, my voice trembling before finding its footing. My mother did not come to help me. She brought a diaper bag I had never seen and a car seat she purchased secretly. She came to take my son. She believes my child is a cure for my sister's medical and psychological issues. If she had succeeded in getting him out of that house, I do not know when or if I would have ever seen him again. I am terrified of her. I am terrified for my son. She's lying. The scream tore through the courtroom. It wasn't my mother, it was Jessica. Jessica was on her feet, her chair clattering backward onto the floor. She was pointing a shaking finger at me, her eyes wide and manic. She promised him to me, Jessica shrieked, clutching the blue hospital blanket tightly. She knew I couldn't have one. She said she was doing it for me. He's mine. He's my baby. The courtroom froze. The gray-suited lawyer desperately grabbed Jessica's arm, trying to pull her back down. Jessica, sit down. Do not speak. But Jessica ripped her arm away. No, Mom said she was just carrying him for me. Because she's younger. Mom promised. She stole my baby. My mother buried her face in her hands. The facade shattered entirely. Judge Garza stared at Jessica for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Jessica's ragged breathing. Bailiff, Judge Garza said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Escort the respondent back to her seat. The bailiff moved forward, but Jessica finally slumped back into her chair, sobbing hysterically into the blue blanket. Judge Garza turned her attention back to my mother, who was now staring at the table, her face chalk white. This court has seen many complex family dynamics, Judge Garza said, her tone devoid of any sympathy. But it is rare to see such a blatant, terrifying sense of entitlement over another human being's child. You bypassed a lock. You attempted to remove an infant. And you have clearly fostered a profound psychological delusion in your eldest daughter. She picked up her pen. The petition is granted, Judge Garza stated, signing the document with sharp, definitive strokes. A permanent personal protection order is issued against both Barbara and Jessica. You are to remain 500 feet away from Holly, David, their child, their residence, and their places of employment. No contact. No third-party contact. If you violate this order, you will be subject to immediate arrest and criminal contempt charges. She closed the file. We are adjourned. My mother didn't look at me as they left. She kept her arm tightly around Jessica, rushing her out of the double doors. I collapsed into my chair, the adrenaline draining from my body so fast I felt dizzy. David wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my hair. It's over, he whispered. We're safe. Which brings us back to today, to this thick manila envelope sitting on my kitchen island. The official court copies arrived in the mail this morning. 3 weeks have passed since the courtroom. 3 weeks of quiet. 3 weeks of learning how to be a mother without the suffocating shadow of my own family hanging over me. I slide the heavy paper out of the envelope. It's covered in legal jargon, stamps, and signatures. But to me, it's the most beautiful document in the world. It is a tangible, legal shield. I hear a sound from the living room. I walk over and lean against the doorframe. David is lying on his back on the rug. Leo is doing tummy time on his chest, lifting his heavy, wobbly head to stare at his dad. David is making ridiculous clicking noises, and Leo suddenly lets out a short, gummy laugh. It's the first time he's laughed. I watch them, and the tightness in my chest, a tightness I have carried since childhood, constantly waiting for the next crisis, the next demand, the next time I would be asked to set myself on fire to keep my sister warm, finally releases. I walk over to the kitchen trash can. I hold up the envelope that the orders came in, along with a stack of unopened mail from extended relatives who still think they can guilt trip me into reconciliation. I drop them all into the garbage. We don't owe them anything. The blood that connects us is just biology. The paper on my counter is reality. We are the family now, and we are finally safe. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes, blood is just a biological coincidence demanding a strict, legal boundary to keep your peace. If my story made your blood boil, if it made you hold your kids a little tighter, or if you've ever had to cut off toxic relatives to survive, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. What was the final straw that made you walk away?